Hello, and welcome to a special end-of-year edition of The Prestige, a podcast about films, filmmaking, and film theory.
Each episode, we normally focus on a film and talk about that film, some of the themes around the history behind it. But this is our last show of the year. It's that quiet, lovely period between Christmas and New Year's. And so we thought we'd have a wrap-up of the year. Our top films of the year, top 5 each.
And we are going to introduce that top 5 and maybe have a bit of input from the other to tell us why we're wrong and what we need to include in our top 5. And we're also going to finish with some honourable mentions of things we haven't had time to talk about much.
Exactly. So, without further ado, I think the best place is to work through our 5s and our 4s and our 3s and our 2s and our 1s. So, Sam, do you want to go first? And talk about your number 5.
So, yes, to start with, number 5, The Martian. This was a film that I wanted to be higher up my list. I think we've spent quite a lot of time talking about it, certainly on this podcast, and I said how I wanted it to be a head and shoulders standout film of the year. I didn't feel it was, but I can still see that it was a really well-made film, and lots of the acting performances in it were very enjoyable. So I'm quite happy to put it on my list of top 5.
Fair enough. My top 5, and this unfortunately isn't going to feature in Sam's list too highly, I don't think, is the brand new Star Wars. So we're lucky Sam hasn't actually seen it yet, so feel free to shame him into that. But I think we'll talk about it next week. But that, for me, I saw it at this week. I enjoyed it. I thought that it had a lot to. I'll already talk about it more in the podcast. But for me, yeah, I thought it was good. But it only sat at number 5, shall we say?
Okay, right. Well, as you said, I haven't seen that yet, so I have no frame of reference. I won't be able to talk about that very much. Number 4 is a film I absolutely know will be nowhere near your top 5. And it is the film Spy.
Yes, just no. That may even make my list of the bottom 5 of the year.
I really enjoyed this film. I really enjoyed Jason Statham, particularly in this film. I thought that in a year in which there was so much hype about a particular spy film, that didn't necessarily do amazing things. This was a spy film that I felt was particularly enjoyable and got lots of things right.
Fair enough. I mean, for me, Melissa McCarthy, I don't find her funny. I will grant you Statham was very funny. And this is a debate that me and my wife have this day because she really enjoyed it.
Good.
But yeah, I just did not laugh. Did not in any way find it amusing.
Right, okay.
But there we go. Different strokes, different world. There we go.
Yeah. You're number 4.
No, number 4, I don't think it'll be on your list either. I don't even know if you've seen it. But it was from Ben Palmer, starring Simon Pegg and Lake Bell. It was the film Man Up. No,
I haven't seen this.
Now, Man Up is essentially a romantic comedy. The meet cute being that a single and lonely woman sneaks her way onto someone else's blind date, claiming to be the other person. This, I think, in lesser hands, could have been a terrible film, because it sounds terrible. But they dispense with that kind of conceit pretty early. And then it just explores, like, modern dating and the fact that both of them are as screwed up as each other. But it is funny. It is Simon Pegg being Simon Pegg. He feels like a grown-up version of Spaced.
Right.
I think Simon Pegg can struggle in feature films outside of Edgar Wright.
Yes.
I think it's in the past that he often kind of isn't great. Whereas here he feels as close to the Simon Pegg that we wanted to see in these films as I've ever known him. Lake Bell is brilliant. It's got some brilliant supporting cast from different other people. It had me laugh out loud funny.
Is it better than Hector and the Search for Happiness, which is possibly it's in my bottom 10 of films ever? It was so bad.
I would say probably yes. I haven't seen it myself. It didn't get good results. I would say that for me, it's probably the best rom-com I've seen in a decade.
High praise indeed.
Yeah, I would. It's in my honourable mentions list. But Trainwreck from this year was also brilliant.
Well, actually, that segues nicely into my number 3, which is the film Trainwreck.
There you go.
Which I thought was brilliant. We talked about it in a small batch episode of the podcast, and we talked about how this was a particularly good reinvention of romantic comedy. It had a brilliant attitude to men and women, the relationship between men and women, the portrayal of men and women. But more than that, it was just funny. There were laugh out loud moments to do with, and it was nothing to do with the central character. It was, I think I talked about this, the relationship between LeBron James and the Doctor. There was something very heartwarming about that. So I thought there was a lot about this film to enjoy, even quite apart from the fact it was politically very good and culturally very important in terms of sort of reinvigorating this idea of quite a tired genre, the romantic comedy. But I really enjoyed this film. I thought it was really good.
It made my honourable mention. It hasn't made my top 5 because I felt if I'm throwing Man Up in there, we shouldn't throw Trainwreck as well.
Okay.
But yeah, I would echo everything Sam said about that film. I think it is a brilliant film. I would say Man Up's more down the traditional rom-com route, but brilliantly done. Very British sensibilities, but worth looking. But yeah, Trainwreck, the same. The closing scene, the closing sort of moment, shall we say, of Trainwreck when they have the big romantic gesture had me curled in a ball, laughing with tears running down my face. So I can only say good things about it.
Yeah, great film.
My number 3 is a film by writer-turned-director Alex Garland, starring 2 actors who are now in Star Wars, and it is Ex Machina. Ex Machina basically is the story of just these 2 guys, played by Donald Gleeson and Oscar Isaacs, playing Caleb and Jay. They basically, one of them is a programmer, and he's built a robot. And he's brought the other guy in, Caleb, to try and work out if it would pass a super version of the Turing test, to see if he'd believe it was real. It is equal parts sci-fi, equal parts psychological thriller. It is in many ways, an erotic thriller. It is, yes, it's drama, it's action. It is nothing like what I thought it was going to be. And I think that it's a quiet film, but it's an amazingly well done film. And it kind of caught me at left field. I picked a lot from it. But I've been a big fan of Alec Garland's writing, if not the versions of his films. But this one I really, really liked.
Oh, good. I haven't seen any. The moment you said writer-director Alec Garland, I had visions of terrible visions of The Beach, which I wasn't particularly enamoured of. The
I think that's fair.
I certainly was not enamoured of the adaptation of it. So.
I did like the book, but yeah, the film itself was something to be merrily forgotten.
Yes, indeed. My number 2, I don't believe you've seen. It is it was a film, as a biopic of Steve Jobs, and it was There were brilliant performances from Michael Fassbender, from Kate Winslet, as you'd expect, but also from Seth Rogen, and something that we talked about when you talked about Christmas films last time. What was the Christmas film with Seth Rogen?
The Night Before.
Yes, the night before. I thought this was really good. The acting performances were pitched perfectly. Apart from Jeff Daniels playing the role that Jeff Daniels always plays, it was brilliant. And things that people didn't like about this, things that critics had nasty things to say about, I loved about this film. I loved the 3-act structure and the way that every part of those 3 acts was the build up to a product launch, and it was far more about the relationships that went into suppose the relationships that went into the character of Steve Jobs rather than necessarily the minutiae of Steve Jobs' life. I thought it was a brilliant film, and it had, well, as you'd expect from an Aaron Sorkin written film, it had a lot of people walking and talking, and long shots and West Wing like corridor shots. But it was particularly well done. I thought that was a brilliant film. So that's my number 2.
I will say when it comes to Steve Jobs, I haven't seen it. I'm getting more and more intrigued to see it. I think that, and this is to my detriment as a film critic, I was kind of tarred by my view of Apple fanboys. And whilst I do own an iPad these days, I've been a staunch PC fanboy for many years, and you end up with this kind of a direction of all things Apple, and I think I lumped that in at the same sort of throwing baby out with the dishwasher. But I will say that I'm getting more and more intrigued with it. I'm sure come the new year I will check it out. My number 2 is one that you've already mentioned, and that's The Martian.
Right.
I was a massive fan of the book. I would agree that the film isn't everything I wanted it to be, but I still really enjoyed it. It took me on a ride. It took me on a journey. I think that the acting was brilliant, and it really kind of, it got a visceral reaction from me, which, as I've just said many times, is often what I'm after from a film. Something that kind of reaches and touches me. And this did. And in that, I'm a massive fan of the book. So I think that it's number 2 on the list for me. Certainly, on a better year, it wouldn't have been as high, shall we say? I think some of the problems we've discussed in our discussion bits are there, and that is true. But for me, it was still one of the ones I wasn't. I think that's kind of how I often judge this list of the year. What do I want to watch again?
Yes, I think. Well, you say what do I want to watch again, and you say in a better year it wouldn't be so high. I think that is true for the ones further down my list. I reckon my 1, 2, and 3 are really, really good films. I think Trainwreck would be good in any year. I think Steve Jobs is one that I really enjoyed and thought would be good in every year. And my number 1 is the film Inside Out that we talked about on this podcast. And I think that would be a great film in any year. I think these 3 films I had at 1, 2, 3, and I was moving them around, and I wasn't sure whereabouts they should be. But I think Inside Out should get the nod, and we've eulogised about it a lot on this podcast before. I think it should also get the nod for being an animated film, for being such a phenomenally successful animated film. And I really do. There are sort of murmurings about Inside Out and Oscars next year, and the first animated film to be nominated for, to win the Best Picture Oscar. And I would love that to be the case. It was a standout film of 2015 for me.
It says a lot about our differing tastes that my number one isn't on your list, and your number one hasn't been on my list. um, I'm unsurprised my number one hasn't been on your list, given our discussion of it. But my number one, I think anyone who listens to the podcast will probably know, is Mad Max Fury Road. The very well belated fourth instalment in the Mad Max series from George Miller. For me, it is close to what pure cinema is, as I've seen in many years. It is beautifully visual. It is a story, as I've discussed many times, that could only be told on cinema. There is no version of this film that isn't a cinematic experience. I think that it is lean as a film. I think it's stripped down to its purest form. Whether you like that purest form, I will grant you, is up for debate. But I think that there's a film without an inch of flab on it. It hasn't got any kind of diversions. It isn't bogged down by subplots or confusing backstories. It's just a pure cinematic joyride from start to finish. And it is the one that I'm very much hoping to get under the tree at Christmas, just to watch it again. It's not only my best film of the year, but it probably make my top 5 of all time.
Listeners to this podcast will know that I am not as enamoured of this film as Rob is by any means, and I'm not going to say anything about the film. I think what I've said about this film has been said before, but I will just say that although I didn't like this film greatly, I thought Tom Hardy's performance was just amazing. That was, and I've talked about other films that I've enjoyed this year. I don't think any single performance in any of those films comes close to Tom Hardy's performance, or indeed Charlize Theron's performance in this. I think the individual acting performances in this were absolutely extraordinary.
I'm glad you agree. I'd like to throw in some quick honourable mentions.
Mm-hmm.
Things we haven't covered that's probably sat somewhere in my top 10, but not quite in my top 5. I think that, as I mentioned before, Trainwreck would probably make sense. I think I would probably add a push to add Inside Out to that list, though I don't think I was quite as enamoured it by everyone else was. I would also add in, just for those that enjoy my more obscure picks, a film called The Tribe. I think I may discuss this as my recommendation this week. It is basically a story told entirely in sign language.
Right.
There is no commentary, there is no subtitles, there is no relation. It is told entirely in sign language. It's about a deaf teenager going to a boarding school. It is more St. Trinian's on crack. There are prostitution rings, there is violence, there is murder, there is drug running. But it's all told through sign language. It is all told through the squeaks and noises, and all the ancillary sounds are all there, but there is no dialogue, there is no subtitles, there is nothing. It is a wholly unusual film experience for me. I was also going to throw in a film called Mommy, which is a French-Canadian film. Basically, it's the story of a mum and a son. He's I believe, ADHD with bipolar disorder. But I'm happy to be corrected by that by various people. He is psychotic, but the mother is no better at times. It's a ferocious bit of filmmaking. It is a visual experience unlike... I suppose it's the closest to Mad Max you'll get in a family drama. And my last sort of one to mention is a documentary called Electric Boogaloo, The Wild and Untold Story of Canon Films, which is a brilliant title. Canon Films are responsible for all those terrible films from the 80s.
You're going to have to narrow this down.
No, no, I don't. They are responsible for all of those films. They are responsible for Death Wish. They are responsible for Death Multiple Force. They launched Chuck Norris. They launched the careers. That whole brand of 80s terrible action Philippines films, they made them all. And this is the story of how the boom and bust of this company, Canon Films, and how they were responsible for inventing so much of what we consider now to be grindhouse and cult films.
All right.
Yes,
recommendations. Not recommendations, honourable mentions. I don't go to cinema an awful lot. I suppose compared to Rob, certainly not outside of this podcast. But I have got a couple of things. I will say that we've spoken about it before on this podcast. I really enjoyed is the wrong word, but really appreciated the film Beasts of No Nation. And we've talked about the reasons for this, and also I like the idea of films moving into different media, and the idea of something else that came out this year and came to prominence this year is sort of Netflix box sets created by Netflix. They're no longer buying wholesale. They're commissioning things like Daredevil and Jessica Jones. Daredevil I very much enjoyed this year. Jessica Jones I've just started watching, and I think that although that's in sort of 50-minute or an hour chunks rather than necessarily feature films, that's one of my positives this year, I suppose, is the way that the film experience, the cinematic experience, has moved into a TV arena and then moved into a Netflix arena as well. A couple of things from the very end of 2014, and both of them I mentioned in passing on this podcast. Actually, the first one I mentioned in our very first episode is The Raid 2. Which I loved. I know it's a 2014 film, but I just wanted to mention it again because it's such a brilliant film. And there are lots of bad things to be said about. And you've just mentioned action films and the Philippines in the same sentence. This is nothing like those films in the 80s, and it's. You think The Raid was shocking and traumatic and a claustrophobic cinematic experience. You haven't seen anything until you've seen The Raid 2. And my other one from the very end of 2014 is the film Big Eyes. I thought Christoph Waltz was very underused in Spectre, which I'm pleased to see has appeared nowhere in either of our lists. I do love Christoph Waltz, and I thought this film Big Eyes was one of his best. I also, although I hesitate to mention it, but I've mentioned Spy already and roused your anger. I will mention Mission Impossible, the recent Mission Impossible film, as being very enjoyable and better than I thought it was going to be. So the Mission Impossible this year is one of my sort of, I suppose, more tongue-in-cheek recommendations for this year. And a couple of things I've mentioned that I don't get to cinema much. So a couple of things that I've missed this year and want to catch up on in the new year are Amy, the documentary about Amy Winehouse, and Whiplash, which, although it came out at Sundance Festival in 2014, it was only on general release in this country at the beginning of 2015. So it's another 2015 film that I didn't get around to seeing and very much want to.
Excellent. Well, that's probably enough from us to wrap the year up. Please subscribe if you haven't before already. Please give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to us. They really do help us get in front of more people. And basically, thanks for being our listeners. It's been a great year for me and Sam to do this podcast. And hopefully we'll do it for many years to come.
It's been brilliant, yes. Do get in touch on Twitter. You can talk to both of us at Prestige Podcast.
You can find me at Rob Kaiju.
You find me at life_academic.
And we'll see you guys in the new year.
The Prestige is a Kaiju Industries production. Check out their other work at facebook.com/Kaiju Industries. Rawr! Arg.